Hello everyone and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets and drama. So I'm back for another Have Your Say video and we'll be recapping season 16 episode 5. And I know I'm usually on camera for these things, but I was away this weekend and I've not had time to actually record it in person, so I'm just doing a voiceover to get it out quicker. Hope you don't mind. So today we're going to be recapping this week's episode of Drag Race. I'll be going through the results of the Have Your Say poll and whether you agree with this week's outcome, and we'll be talking about some drama involving Plain Jane and Bob the Drag Queen. All that and more coming up in today's video, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start by recapping the episode. So the queens come back into the workroom and they're very sad because of Mirage's elimination. Q seems to be upset that she's been safe and not won anything so far, and the other queens are kind of giving Q the side eye while she's talking about it. And this did kind of remind me of on All Stars 3 when Milk was talking about being safe and then Trixie said that's a lot of emotion for safe. And Plain Jane then kind of called out Q and said that she's not going to cry about being in the top and not winning, which seemed to annoy Q. And I feel like they were definitely setting up this narrative this week of Q being the new kind of Jan by not winning anything, and they wanted her to have this kind of face crack moment. And this does become important later in the episode, which we'll talk about later. And I'd just like to say thank you to the sponsor of this video, Dinnerly. You've probably heard me talk about Dinnerly before, but they are a fabulous and affordable meal kit service and I really love this company. With Dinnerly, every week you can choose from over 100 yummy recipes, select your delivery date, and Dinnerly will provide all the ingredients for you in an insulated box so you can create some delicious meals. Dinnerly were also kind enough to send me a few boxes and I got to try out several of their recipes. And some of my favourites were the cheesy pumpkin risotto, bacon and potato hash, and the halloumi and quinoa salad. And what's more, if you use my code TWithMatt, you'll save up to $150 off your first 5 boxes with free shipping on your first box. And this amazing discount means that you'll only pay $2.99 per portion for these incredibly tasty meals. Click the link in the description or in the pinned comment to get your discount today. Thanks again to Dinnerly for sponsoring this video. The queens did a mini challenge which involved the queens doing a quick drag look, and they had to come up with their own title and bio for their own book, and then they had to do a photo shoot for the book cover. And Safira Cristal won the mini challenge, which I felt was very deserved because I thought she was really funny. We find out that this week's challenge is a girl group challenge, and the queens split into 3 groups and they have to write their own verses to 3 different RuPaul songs. And the 3 groups are Q.D.S.M, which is Dawn, Morphine, Q and Safira, and their song was Star Baby. The next was Lovah Girlz, which was Amanda, Plain Jane, Plasma and Tsunami, and their song was Courage to Love. And then the final group was Thicc Stick, which was Geneva, Megami, Maya and Nymphia, and their song was A.S.M.R Lover. And I think they definitely set up this narrative, as they always do, that Megami was picked last for the challenge and she was quite upset about it. And that group consists of quite quiet queens, and the other contestants thought that they were not going to do very well. So to me, it was obvious that they were either going to fail really badly or, more likely, they were going to win this week. And Drag Race love doing this by setting up a particular narrative, and after having watched so many seasons and episodes of Drag Race, I feel like I can kind of see these storylines in Drag Race doing that, and let me know in the comments if you also notice this sort of thing. Okay, so let's move on to the performances. I won't go through each queen individually because that would just take too long, but I'll talk about each group and then give my thoughts for the group. So the first group was Q.D.S.M with Star Baby. So I think that the queens did a really good job in this group. However, I will say out of the 3 groups, I think this unfortunately would have been my least favourite just because it felt somehow disconnected. I think some of the queens were clearly very good dancers and then others not so much, and it did feel like there was a little bit of lack of cohesion in this group. They were also definitely pushing this narrative of Q not being the best dancer, and every time they showed Q, they would then show one of the judges looking quite unimpressed, which was a little bit shady. I actually thought Q's verse was quite good and her singing was good, but the dancing was perhaps not quite as natural as some of the other queens in the group who are all really good dancers. And as someone myself who I can say I do definitely have 2 left feet, maybe even 3 left feet, I can really relate to Q's struggle in this. And the judges also did say later that they thought that Q's look during the challenge was a little bit basic compared to what we've come to expect from Q. But overall, I thought the group was still fun and I thought they had some good verses and some good choreo. For me, I think Sapphira stood out the most from this group because her verse had some really funny moments in it, like for example when she said, quote, "I bring the heat by keeping my cool, I look like this, you look a damn fool." And I thought that was a really funny lyric. The second group was Lovah Girlz with Courage to Love. This group was my second favourite of the three because I feel like they had a little bit more cohesion than the first group and I did like their verses. Plasma and Amanda were definitely bringing the vocals and Tsunami looked stunning, and then I think Plain Jane went down the more comedy route with her lyrics. This group was a little bit difficult to judge, I think, and we'll kind of discuss that later. But I do think that Amanda got quite harsh critiques from the judges and they said that she looked a bit messy. And as soon as they showed Amanda with her wig going in her eyes and then they showed Michelle looking a bit unimpressed, I just knew that was where it was going. And as I mentioned earlier, I feel like this is all part of the storyline that we get on Drag Race that we saw at the beginning of the episode. And they were showing Amanda writing her verse, and Plain Jane was surprised at how good Amanda was at writing her verses and also dancing. And I feel like they were kind of setting up this narrative that Amanda was potentially going to be in the top this week. And so maybe it also wasn't that much of a surprise to see that Amanda then got negative critiques and she kind of went from being the top at the beginning of the episode to then being at the bottom. For me, the standout in this group was actually Amanda because I thought that she danced really well and she looked like she was genuinely having a lot of fun. But I did think that Plain Jane's lyrics were quite funny and she was probably the one that was the most different from the group, so I also quite liked that element of it. And then finally we had the final group, which was Thicc and Stick with the song A.S.M.R Lover. First of all, I will say that this group was my favourite of the three. I think that they did have the best of the three RuPaul songs in my opinion. I really like the song A.S.M.R and I think it's probably catchier and maybe better known than the other two songs, or at least in my opinion, and I do think that definitely helped their group overall because I think that the song was just catchier. But for me, the other reason I felt like this group was the best was because I think they had the most cohesion of the entire groups and it really felt like a real girl group. I also thought the little whisper moments when they said the words like was really funny because it was so simple but effective and it really made the song memorable. The other thing I appreciated from this group is that I thought that they weren't trying too hard to fit lots of words into their verse, which meant that I could actually pretty easily understand all of their verses. I'm not sure if this is just me, let me know in the comments if you agree, but sometimes I find with these verses that the music in the background is so loud that you actually can't hear the verses that well. And then on top of that, I do think some queens try and say so much in their rap verse that you almost can't actually understand what they're saying because they're just going so quickly. So personally, I do prefer it when the queens take it slightly slower and use less words, but they really make each word count, and I felt like this group did that quite well. The standout for me in this group was Nymphia. I thought that her lyrics were so good and her dancing was also really good. And it was a little bit unexpected because Nymphia had been shown at the beginning of the episode struggling with her lyrics. But then Megami actually tweeted after the episode and said, "For someone who thinks that I didn't bust my ass, I wrote my verse, I literally wrote Nymphia's verse, helped Geneva edit her verse, I contributed the middle part of the choreo, I came up with the team name, I fought with the fear of God in me for this, I was an asset to my team." And I think this was because Megami had been getting some criticism saying that her group carried her through the performance, so I think Megami was kind of just justifying and kind of clapping back to some of those claims. And Nymphia did actually back this up and she tweeted confirming that Megami did basically write her verse for her. And in my opinion, regardless of how you feel about Megami, I do think that all the queens deserve credit if they help other queens. So I thought it was really nice that Nymphia and Megami were confirming that Megami did effectively write Nymphia's verse, so she does deserve some credit for Nymphia's success in that group. Megami also tweeted and said that in the part of her verse when she said, "Ain't nobody eat the runway like I do," that was actually a reference to Lemon's verse on Canada's Drag Race Season 1 when she said, "Ain't nobody pussy pop it quite like I do." And I thought that was a really fun reference to another season of Drag Race, and I did really like that because Lemon's verse was very iconic and I definitely got the reference when I heard it. I thought it was also a great full story moment that Megami went from being picked last at the beginning of the episode to actually being one of the better ones this week in the challenge. And I did quite like Megami's verse. I thought it was fun and I thought spelling out her name was really fun and such a simple technique, but it works. One other interesting element was they definitely showed that Nymphia was kind of hiding her talents in terms of writing, dancing and performing, and I think it was funny that the other queens kind of clocked this. So I do wonder if this is going to be a kind of ongoing storyline, a little bit it reminded me of when Willow Pill did the same sort of thing on season 14, when she played her cards quite close to her chest and then she ended up being good at so much stuff. So moving on to the runway for this week, and the category was Faster Pussycat Wig, which was basically a runway with a pussycat wig. As always, I'm not going to critique the fashion because I'm totally clueless when it comes to that, so I'm just going to go through each outfit and then talk about how the queen described their look. So first we had Morphine Love Dion, who was wearing a large black outfit and there were red scratch marks on her face and also her behind, and she said that it was a blood red pussycat wig. Then we had Q, who said that she was giving a badass warrior vampiric knight with a sleek white pussycat wig and an armoured corset. Then we had Saphira Crystal, who said that she didn't have just a regular pussycat wig, and she took it off and it became an actual cat, which she held in her hand, and then she put her little finger up to her mouth. And I do believe this gesture was a mix of two different references, one of them being Blofeld from James Bond, who was one of the iconic villains who had a white cat. And then I think the finger part came from Dr. Evil from Austin Powers, which in itself is a parody of James Bond. And just in case you're interested, I looked it up, and this thing of having the finger next to your mouth in Austin Powers was actually inspired by an episode of the sci-fi horror series from the 1950s and 60s called The Twilight Zone, when one of the characters performed a similar gesture. Anyway, back to the runway, and the next queen was Dawn, and she said that her look was Alien Girl Goes to the Mall, and she said that it was a lot and it's very her style, and the pussycat wig was at the back. Next was Plasma, and she said she was doing a head-to-toe gay-ass Hermes, the Greek messenger god. And here's a reference image of Hermes the god, just in case you're interested. And Plasma's pussycat wig had gold detail on it, and also huge headphone features, because she said she wanted to give Hermes a Y2K feel. A mandatory meeting was next, and she said that her pussycat wig was the top of her robin's egg, which was also her head, and she said that she wanted to use the wigs in an unexpected way. And later, during the judges' critiques, Amanda was asked about it, and she said that when she thought of pussycat wig, she thought of cats, so she thought of this idea of eggs in a nest. Next we had Tsunami Muse, who was wearing what the judges described as a matador-inspired outfit with high-waisted pants, a red blazer and a kind of fur stole over one shoulder. And Tsunami said that not everyone can look good in a pussycat wig, but she knows that she does look good. Next we had Plain Jane, who was wearing a latex face kini with a platinum pussycat wig, and she said that her look was extreme latex bimbo to the max. Then we had Geneva Carr, who said that she was giving 1920s flapper girl with a finger wave wig, which was very retro and elegant. Next we had Maya Iman LePage, who said that her wig was giving Mary J. Blige as well as mushroom shortcut. And because the hair was small, she said that she's giving big shoulders. Then we had Megami, who said that she was the Staten Island Ferry, presumably because it goes past the Statue of Liberty. And she said she had her pussycat pixie wig on backwards because it looked more punk. And she wanted to show off her tattoos, which is why the dress is very sheer. And finally we had Nymphia Wind, who said she was giving the trinity of meow cats, and she had multiple wig reveals, including a black cat, then a red finger wave wig, and then finally she had one on the back of her head. So moving on to the judges' critiques, and we find out that the team Thicc and Stick are the winning team and everyone else is up for elimination. As I said earlier, I do agree that that group did do the best in my opinion because I think there was the most cohesion between them. After the critiques, RuPaul asked that shady question which we all know and love, which was, who should go home tonight and why? And on the pit stop this week with Trixie Mattel and Maddie Morphosis, they did mention that this question has kind of come early in the season. And I did wonder if perhaps they did this because they wanted to bring up Amanda and Plain Jane's feud again, and because Amanda was in the bottom this week, it was potentially the last time they could do that. And we'd seen earlier in the episode that when the queens were getting ready for the main stage, Plain Jane had a confrontation with Q, and then Plain Jane brought Amanda into the conversation kind of unnecessarily, and Amanda defended herself. But anyway, in terms of the votes, Saphira voted for Amanda, Morphine also voted for Amanda, Q then also chose Amanda and Tsunami, which was kind of a gag that she chose two people. Dawn voted for Q, as did Plasma. Amanda also voted for Q, and so did Tsunami. And then Plain Jane chose Amanda. So I think, unsurprisingly, the bottom two for this week were Amanda and Q because they were the only two people that received lots of votes. And that meant that Q and Amanda lip-synced for their life, and unfortunately, Amanda was told to sashay away. And I think similar to Mirage's elimination last week, Amanda's elimination was also quite shocking. And so that brings me on nicely to the result of this week's Have Your Say poll. So question 1 was, do you agree with the outcome of this week's episodes, i.e. tops, bottoms and elimination? And we had 59% for no and 41% for yes. And so although no did get the majority of the votes, it wasn't actually as split as I thought it might be based on some of the comments. Question 2 was, in your opinion, who should have won this week? And with 53.9% of the vote, which was the vast majority, we had Nymphia win. And I can see this. I do think that Nymphia did extremely well, and I really liked her verse. I thought it was funny, it was very referential to her, and I also thought her dancing was really good. Then we had A.S.M LePage with 9.6%, and then we had Megami with 8.2%. And this does make sense because they were all in the same group, and I do think that they all performed really well in this challenge. Question 3 was, in your opinion, who should have been eliminated this week? And with 41.1% of the vote, we had Q. And then we had a mandatory meeting with 29.8%, and then Megami with 9.8%. I thought this was quite surprising in a way. I do agree that I don't think Q did the best this particular week, but I'm kind of surprised that Q had received so many votes for being eliminated in this poll, because I do think, in my opinion, you have to look at the whole competition, not just week by week. Obviously, that's just my opinion. And I think Q has done so well so far that I do think it would have been unfair to eliminate Q just based on 1 week. I can see why Amanda potentially was in the bottom because of the judges' critiques, but I don't actually think that she was the worst in the challenge though, so I'm not sure if she really should have been in the bottom to start with. And then we also had Megami, which was kind of interesting with 9.8%, because I thought Megami did actually do quite well. I quite enjoyed her verse, and she was in the winning group, and as we know, she did actually help a lot of the other queens in her group with the writing and all the choreography and things like that. Question 4 was, in your opinion, who was the best in the challenge this week? And we had, unsurprisingly, Nymphia win with 39.8%, which was the vast majority. We then had A.S.M LePage with 12.5% and Megami with 10%. And I think this is somewhat at odds with the last question we just talked about, which was who should go home, because Megami received a lot of votes for that, but then she also received a lot of votes for this. So potentially, maybe it also came down to Megami's runway this week as to people's decision about whether she should stay or not. So question 5 was, in your opinion, who had the best runway look this week? And again, unsurprisingly, we had 61% for Nymphia win. And I do agree, I think Nymphia probably did have the best runway because she had multiple reveals, and we all love a reveal on Drag Race, and I also thought each individual reveal was quite cool and it looked very polished. Then we had Q with 9%, which again, I do think is fair. I thought Q always looks very good and very polished on the runway, so that makes sense. And then we had Sapphira Crystal with 7%. And again, I think Sapphira did do really well this week, and her runway look was also great, so I can see why people said that. And not far behind, we did have Tsunami Muse and Morphine Love Dion that had 6.6% and 6.1% respectively. And then finally, question 6 was, in your opinion, who is the front runner so far from the season, i.e. most likely to win? And unsurprisingly, we have 73.9% for Nymphia win. And again, I do think this makes sense. Nymphia has done well in pretty much every single episode, and she's never really faltered, and I think this week was no different, so I can see why Nymphia is very high up in this ranking. We then had Sapphira Crystal with 16.4%, which also makes sense. And then we also had Plain Jane with 5.3%. And I thought this was interesting because Plain Jane didn't necessarily get that many really high proportion of the votes in the other questions. So I thought this was quite an interesting outcome, even though she has been doing quite well in the season. So moving on to the comments for this week from the poll. On Patreon, I asked my Patreons if they agreed with the outcome of the episode, and my Patreon Lisa said that she thought it was a fair outcome this week. And another of my Patreons named Rochelle said it needed to happen, so yes, she did agree with it. And so it seems like 2 of my Patreons at least thought that it was Amanda's time to go. However, this elimination was very controversial, and there were lots of other comments that said that Amanda should not have been in the bottom to start with. And there were also plenty of comments that said that Amanda actually won the lip sync against Q. And I guess this then brings up the issue I mentioned earlier is it fair for someone to beat someone in a lip sync and stay just because they won the lip sync, or do you also have to look at their track record throughout the whole season? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on that are. And there were also other people who commented saying that they thought the judges were looking for reasons to put Amanda in the bottom, for example the padding. I will be honest and say I did think the padding did seem slightly trivial. I didn't personally notice it, so I was kind of surprised that they made such a big deal out of it. I will say that I was very surprised that Amanda was in the bottom this week. Although she did get quite a lot of critiques from the judges because of her looks, I thought that actually in the challenge itself she was probably one of the better ones, and I quite enjoyed her verse and her performance. But I think it also comes down to, for this particular type of challenge, whether they judge it in groups or individually, because I think that may have changed the outcome. Because we've seen on Drag Race, sometimes they judge it in groups and other times they split up the groups and put someone in the winning group in the bottom and vice versa. But let me know in the comments what you thought about this week and whether you agreed with the elimination and the outcome of the episode. And there were also some other comments saying that people were very split with Plain Jane. Some people have said that she's just being mean for absolutely no reason and they are sort of getting tired of her. But then other people have said that they're living for the drama that she's bringing. And now moving on to a little bit of drama this week that happened that involved Plain Jane and Bob the drag queen. As I mentioned in my last Have Your Say video, Bob had said on his podcast with Monet called Sibling Rivalry that he felt that the queens were deliberately trying to be weird and silly on Drag Race because they think that it will get them further in the competition because the judges often praise the contestants that are kind of weird and stupid. And Bob referenced Plain Jane and her Burger Fingers song from the talent show as an example of this. Plain Jane then posted an Instagram story with a clip of Bob and Monet, and the caption said, no, I get that people can't compute me being both sexy AF and a clown who performed this number well before Drag Race, but this take is tired. Monet also commented on the original video clip from Sibling Rivalry and said points were made. And Plain Jane replied to Monet saying, 0 points were made in fact. Burger Finger wasn't written for Drag Race. It was a number that my friend and I performed in Boston prior. Love you so much, Monet, but this take from Miss Bob was a hater take. Willem also commented on the original post from Sibling Rivalry and said agreed, and Plain Jane replied saying you would. The drama then continued on Twitter, and Plain Jane retweeted a different episode of Bob on Sibling Rivalry when Bob was talking about Plain Jane bringing Amanda into this week's feud in the workroom. And Bob said that Plain Jane needed to leave Amanda alone and asked what her problem was. And Plain Jane retweeted that clip and said, Granny is opinionated, but we love her no matter how senile. Plain Jane also tweeted the music video for her song Burger Finger and said, frankly, it's rude for Lovah Girlz to claim Burger Fingers has less artistic merit than other bleepier talents, especially girls that never even had to prepare talent numbers on their original seasons. Let's see you do better, Grandma. Bob then retweeted Plain Jane's tweet and said, girl, shut up, lol. And Plain Jane responded to that and said, finally saying something that makes sense, now this I can get behind. And the reactions seemed to be somewhat mixed, with some people supporting Plain Jane, but then a lot of people were saying that Bob kind of ate Jane up. But as I always say in my videos, please don't send hate to the queens. There's a difference between the queens talking about it amongst themselves and being a bit shady, but that's no excuse for any of us to get involved and send hate to the queens. So, as always, just enjoy this drama passively and don't be hateful to the queens. So there you go, there was my Have Your Say for Season 16, Episode 5. Let me know in the comments whether you agreed with the outcome of this episode. And also let me know who you're rooting for as the winner of this season. And I'd like to give a shout out to all of my amazing Patreon members. Thank you so much, you're all incredible, and your support really does make such a difference to my channel, so thank you so much for being part of my community. And if you'd like to get early access to my videos such as this one, as well as a raft of other benefits, please consider joining my Patreon and supporting my channel, and I'll put a link in the description. Please make sure you like, comment and share this video as it really helps support my channel. And of course, please make sure you hit the subscribe button to stay up to date about new uploads. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you'll join me again in future videos. Thank you, bye!